The transition to artificial intelligence poses a systemic threat to the economy. It quietly erodes the consumer purchasing power that keeps markets afloat. The anxiety that machines will replace human labor dates back to the earliest days of the Industrial Revolution. For decades, macroeconomists relied on a principle called the reinstatement effect. The assumption was that, as old tasks were automated, new industries would naturally emerge to reabsorb displaced workers and stabilize the labor market. Recent data shows that this historical balance is breaking down. In the last few years, the tech sector alone has cut hundreds of thousands of jobs, and the creation of new roles is failing to keep pace. Industry leaders are explicitly stating that these jobs are permanently obsolete. In 2026, Block laid off nearly half its workforce, with CEO Jack Dorsey confirming that artificial intelligence had entirely eliminated the need for those roles. Artificial intelligence is doing exactly what it was designed to do: eliminate costs. But by aggressively severing wages, it is actively destroying the core purchasing power that modern industry relies on to survive. This means AI displacement is a product-market problem. The workers losing their jobs are simultaneously the consumers buying the products. This diagram shows the basic macroeconomic cycle. Capital flows from firms to workers as wages, then loops back as consumer demand. When AI automates a task, the human worker is removed, the wage line is severed, and returning consumer demand instantly thins out. We are heading toward a scenario economists call the demand cliff. Companies successfully automate their way to boundless productivity, only to find they have zero consumer demand left to purchase their goods. This macroeconomic cliff is entirely visible to the corporate sector. The paradox is why rational, forward-looking firms don't simply hit the brakes to protect their own future revenue. Rational firms will not stop. Through a pure demand externality, market competition mathematically traps them in a dominant strategy arms race. To understand the trap, we have to look at the automation margin, the exact mathematical calculation a firm makes when deciding whether to replace a human task with an algorithm. There are two primary variables at play. First is the per-task cost saving, labeled S. Second is the effective demand loss per automated task, labeled L, which represents the lost spending of the displaced worker. Consider a pure monopoly where N equals 1. The firm absorbs 100% of the cost savings, but it also fully inhales the entire evaporating cloud of lost demand. Because it feels the full macroeconomic pain, its automation dial safely stops at what economists call the cooperative optimum. While the friction of integrating new technology provides a small, natural break, it is the fear of total demand loss that truly restrains the monopolist. A monopolist naturally restricts layoffs because it perfectly internalizes the economic consequences of its own actions. But the technology sector is not a monopoly. It is a fragmented, competitive market made up of multiple symmetric firms. When we expand the model to a competitive sector, the immediate incentive remains identical. If firm A fires a worker, it captures the exact same intact block of cost savings. Here is where the math fractures. Because competitive pricing distributes revenue across the entire sector, firm A only suffers a tiny fraction of that lost worker's consumer spending. The demand loss splinters. Firm A absorbs only its specific share, L divided by N, while the rest of the demand destruction drifts outward to penalize its rival firms. With the negative weight of demand loss drastically reduced, firm A's calculation changes. The automation dial surges past the safe cooperative optimum, landing on the Nash equilibrium. This gap is the over-automation wedge. As markets become more fragmented and the number of competitors grows, the dilution of consequence increases and the distortion severely worsens. This creates a classic prisoner's dilemma. Because every firm in the sector experiences this exact same mathematical incentive, they all maximize layoffs simultaneously. What is perfectly rational and highly profitable for the individual firm in isolation proves to be collectively destructive for the entire sector. A common assumption is that AI automation simply transfers wealth from the working class to capital owners. This chart maps normalized worker income on the x-axis against normalized owner surplus on the y-axis. It proves the opposite is true. There is a peak, labeled the cooperative optimum, where aggregate value is maximized. But under competitive over-automation, so much aggregate demand is destroyed that overall market value erodes. At the Nash equilibrium, both wages and corporate profits fall strictly below the optimal baseline. This mutual destruction is a pure deadweight loss. It is a strict Pareto deterioration, where absolutely no one wins. We have to evaluate what happens if artificial intelligence becomes vastly more productive, a dynamic economists call the Red Queen effect. Highly productive AI creates an intense market share motive. It drives firms to automate even faster to outpace competitors, which actually widens the wedge and compounds the aggregate demand destruction. Advancing AI capabilities will not naturally solve the macroeconomic crisis. Without intervention, better AI guarantees a steeper plunge over the cliff. The technology industry has proposed macroeconomic lifeboats to handle this displacement, primarily universal basic income and worker equity programs. How does UBI affect profit? It acts as autonomous demand, hiding within the baseline constant, pi zero. When calculating the incentive to automate, firms take the derivative. Being a constant, UBI drops to zero. The automation margin remains completely unchanged. Universal basic income successfully raises the baseline floor of living standards, but it does absolutely nothing to stop a firm from replacing its next human worker. Voluntary agreements between tech firms to limit layoffs will also inevitably collapse. Because defection remains the mathematically dominant strategy, these pacts are impossible to enforce. Policies that merely shift baseline wealth are mathematical illusions. If an intervention doesn't alter the exact marginal cost of a layoff, the trap remains. There is only one structural intervention that actually breaks the dominant strategy trap: the Pigouvian automation tax. To save the market from itself, regulators must force the firm to internalize the exact demand it destroys for its rivals. This requires a tax rate, tau star, equaling the externalized demand. This penalty drops onto the firm's scale. The full cloud of macroeconomic demand loss fuses back together on the ledger. Feeling the true cost, the automation dial retreats to the efficient cooperative optimum. Recycling this tax revenue into worker retraining shrinks the underlying demand loss over time. As displaced workers find new, high-value roles, the required tax shrinks, eventually making the intervention self-limiting. AI mass layoffs are not an inevitable force of technological nature. They are a regulatory failure, requiring immediate taxation to save the economy from itself.